I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be sending around a sign-up sheet. If at any point during the presentation you think, gosh, I'd love to have a conversation with Jessica after this, get a little coaching or learn more about what her business is about, feel free to just jot your information down here. And as I said, I'm really excited to be here tonight because this topic is a passion of mine. I'm generally a believer that there's not much that's new under the sun. But when I was introduced to this content around vertical development a few years ago, I really felt like, gosh, this is really a different way of looking at things. This really does have a significant impact on how we think about developing leaders in our organizations. And for the last several years, I have been reading more and more, and I've taken some more courses, both formally and have done a lot of reading informally. And I have benefited personally from what the concept of vertical development represents, and I've been using it with my clients. And I'm just really a big fan of the content, and that's why I'm excited to share it. So this is my first time actually delivering this content in this kind of a format. So I'm excited to see how it goes and kind of see what kind of a reaction you guys have. So let's go ahead and dive in. So here's just a little bit about me, which you heard in the intro. So today, we're going to really talk about the issue of complexity. I think we've all heard this term a lot, but what does it really mean and how does it really impact our organizations? Going to introduce the concept of vertical development, give you a model with stages of vertical development to look at, and then answer the question, okay, what do I do with this? Like, who cares? It's Monday night, football just started, why am I not at home watching Monday Night Football? So, and now you're really officially missing part of the game because we're running a bit behind time. So, thank you for being here. Okay? So let's dive in really quickly into this question of complexity. So for a long time, I felt like, excuse me, I'm recovering from a double ear infection and a pretty serious head cold, so bear with me while I clear my throat now and then. What does complexity really mean? Like, it's one of those words that gets tossed out there and everyone kind of assumes that you know what it is. And I thought, well, what do we really mean when we say complexity? So I'm going to offer you three options. Turns out there's not one clear definition for what complexity is. So we have one option, one proposition for what complexity is that's coming out of Harvard from Snowden and Boone here that really says complexity is about the relationship between cause and effect. And whether or not you are able to diagnose cause and effect and see it easily, and whether or not there's a level of agreement around cause and effect. So for example, if I were to walk over here and trip on the cord and it came out and the projection came down, cause and effect would be abundantly clear, right? There would probably be everyone would know exactly what had happened. We would all agree on what the solution would be to plug the thing back in, right? Very simple. But that's not really how a lot of our business issues look, right? It's not always clear what the cause is, the effect that's happening from it in real time, and often we can't even diagnose it in hindsight. The market conditions are getting more complex, a lot of moving factors in our business, and so really they're making the case that as cause and effect gets more difficult to diagnose or impossible to diagnose, and there's disagreement about it, meaning that there could be different interpretations, that's when things are beginning to get more complex, okay? Another proposition for what complexity looks like is this idea of problems versus dilemmas. Has anyone heard some of this language? Okay, so the idea from Barry Johnson is that there are problems. These are things that can be solved. For example, me tripping on the cord and plugging it back in again, right? But he says that most of the time we're actually dealing with polarities, and that these are dilemmas that have to be managed, that there is no right answer. And so a great example of this that I imagine that a lot of you deal with is the question of whether or not HR should be centralized or decentralized in your organizations. Is there a right answer to that question? No, not really. It's going to be very situational depending on your industry, your organization, what's going on in your company at this point, at any given point in time. And so that is really the definition of what he says a polarity is. There is no right answer. It's just something that has to be managed over time, and the approach that you might take might change over time, okay? And so he's making the argument that more and more we're dealing with polarities more than we are with problems, and that polarities represent a lot more complexity for us in the workforce. And a third offering in terms of what complexity is comes from Alvin Toffler. He actually passed away just a few weeks ago. And I've got a quote from him here. He wrote a book called Future Shock and coined the term future shock. He basically says that complexity for us as human beings, so he takes a little bit more of a human view versus an organizational view, is when too much change happens in too short a period of time in order for us to adapt and absorb it well, okay? So he says here, future shock is the shattering stress and disorientation that we induce in individuals by subjecting them to too much change in too short a time. Anyone see this happening in your organizations? Oh yeah, right? Okay, so I'm not here to make an argument to you about what the answer to what complexity is. I just want to add some depth to the conversation around what the heck is it, because I felt like that wasn't really happening. So you've got a few ideas to play with here. Why is this important? Why does complexity matter? And that I'm going to propose to you is because we actually have a crisis of complexity happening in our organizations. So this is a summary slide from a company called Lectica that did a study in the federal government. This is 512 federal government leaders at different levels that you can see. And what they did, they took sort of a task-oriented view to complexity. So they measured the task complexity of the people who were in these jobs, and then they measured the capability or the capacity of the people in those roles to meet those task demands. And what you can see here is that as the jobs get more senior, the gap between the demands of the job and the capability of the leader begins to grow, okay? So we have a gap in this study, and it has also been replicated in numerous other settings, that the complexity that we're experiencing in organizations is outpacing leaders' ability to meet those demands, okay? The complexity crisis. And so why? Who cares? Okay, there's a complexity crisis. We have leaders who aren't exactly able to deal with everything that's coming at them. What are the impacts of that? 80% of CEOs are saying that complexity is the biggest issue that they face in their business. Comes out of a study from IBM. Close to $237 billion in profits are lost annually to the top 200 companies only due to complexity issues. And then on the human front, sort of playing off what Alvin Toffler was saying around that the disorientation that humans experience, is that it causes stress. Future shock is essentially a stress reaction. And stress has been called the health epidemic of the 21st century by the World Health Organization and costs American businesses up to $300 billion a year. So the point I want to make is that complexity, we can talk about it in a number of different ways. There is a gap that's well documented. There tends to be a degree of consensus around the research on that gap between what's required for our leaders and what they're able to bring to the table. And it's having a significant impact on their ability to deliver results, okay? Any questions so far? Everybody with me? All right, so what I want to do is put you into discussion groups at your table. So just whatever's easiest, grab one person, grab two people, make a small group around you. You have a couple of handouts on your table. There's a lot of paper on your table. Look for the one that says the Sparks group on it. There's two. And there are a handful of questions on one side that are going to guide you. So what I want to ask you to do is have a quick conversation with one or two people at your table around where complexity is coming from in your organization. Okay? What complexity are you dealing with? What complexity is your organization dealing with? And so this might be market conditions, business disruptions, new products or service introductions, big change initiatives, growth, for example. I was talking to a client this morning who had a baby last year, baby just turned 1, lost her mother in May to Alzheimer's disease, has 14 direct reports and is a key contributor in her organization. And then all of a sudden today, we're having a coaching call and she says, so by the way, I wasn't able to tell you this because I was under a non-disclosure, but my company was put up for sale and I've been the key point person for due diligence since January of last year. And the sale of the company was just announced. And I finally can tell you about it. And I thought, oh my goodness, like the number of things that have been introducing complexity into her life, both personally and professionally, was really significant, right? So turn to your partner or partners, whatever, very informal here, and have a conversation for a couple minutes about what kind of complexity you're seeing. Who wants to share a lot of chattering? Who wants to tell me a couple of things that Robin?
Okay, two industries we were talking about. One was in the printing industry, and a lot of them were not keeping up to date with their products and their processing, and so they were fighting that challenge. And then the other is some of the businesses we dealt with have had trouble feeling like they're not sure what's going to happen in the future, so they don't know where to invest or what to do. Yeah. So they're kind of stuck.
Frozen. Yeah.
Big problem.
Yeah, good. Who else wants to chime in? What kind of complexity are you seeing? I know you guys are in a lot of different industries. Yes?
We talked about some recent acquisitions and the difficulty not just integrating the culture, but the actual processes and competing interests based on prior success and prior failure.
Yeah. Anything to do with M&A work is going to be really, really complex, right? Right. Good. Anybody else want to weigh in here? You kind of get, go ahead.
Yeah, just one that I haven't heard is a change in leadership at the top of the organization.
Right.
Heard from both banking
Who's
and
driving this bus?
services overall. Different approach, younger leaders, whole, different approach on how,
Right.
They want to change the business strategy.
Yeah, certainly makes things messier.
Almost on the same thing, I was going to say something that we've been fighting. It's almost like more of an internal thing with our staff. It's generational issues between different generations, and some of them get together really well across the generations, and some of them are just not meshing. And I find them it seems like every day, literally something coming in that's from personality traits, and a lot of it seems to be based around the generations.
And it touches everything, right? I would never have guessed that the Board of Elections would have an opinion about that. All right, good. So we're getting a feel for this idea of complexity and how challenging it must be to be a leader. And you guys know this. You are leaders in your industry. So the business imperative, this is where I really want to make the case to you that vertical development is part of the answer, at least, to this issue of complexity, is that the development of leadership effectiveness must, at a minimum, keep pace with the rate of change and the rate of escalating complexity. So this comes from a book, Mastering Leadership, that I'm reading right now and really like by Bob Anderson and Bill Adams. And they really kind of highlight the arc of the conversation we're going to have tonight. So there is this idea that our people strategy, our people development needs to keep pace with this complexity, right? Needs to keep pace with the rate of change. So that premise is pretty easy to accept. To put a little bit more nuance around it, and it's like, okay, well, what exactly are we doing that's not working? Nick Petrie from the Center for Creative Leadership says, most leaders already know what they should be doing. They lack the personal development to do so. What does that mean? My husband, I was dry running this presentation with my husband over the weekend, and he's like, what does that mean? And I said, well, take our kids. They're 7 and 10. I said, do they know how to drive? And he said, well, what do you mean know how to drive? I said, well, they understand that there's a gas pedal and a brake pedal and a steering wheel. Like, they can do bumper cars, right? They can do the car ride at Disney World. I said, so do they understand what driving is? Yes, they do. They do understand what driving is. Can they drive? HE double hockey sticks, no way, right? And so that's the point that we're making here. They don't have the maturity or the judgment to be behind the wheel of a real car, right? And that's essentially the argument that these researchers are making, is that even though we equip leaders with a lot of competencies and a lot of skills, a large portion of our existing development efforts are focused around skills and competencies, that they lack the know-how or the worldview to actually put those things into play in a meaningful way that's going to get them results, okay? And so, what is vertical development? I'm telling you, I think part of the answer is vertical development. I'm going to compare and contrast vertical and horizontal development on the next slide, but vertical development for our conversation tonight, it is our internal operating system. It is how we look at the world, right? So I can take my iPhone and I can download a lot of apps and give my phone new skills and capabilities, but unless I upgrade the operating system, the phone is not going to fundamentally behave in a different way. Does that make sense? And so we think about vertical development as that operating system. How do I look at the world? How do I make meaning in the world? And to get a little woo-woo about it, what is my level of consciousness? Okay? And this Einstein quote is great. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. That's essentially what we're talking about here. Okay? So you can think about two kinds of development, and I just love this content. This content also comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. You can think about horizontal development as adding knowledge, skills, and competencies. You can think about it as pouring more stuff into the glass, okay? I am a container, and when I go to a normal leadership development class, I am getting water poured into my cup of learning more stuff. I'm pouring water into your cup tonight. I'm giving you new knowledge, right? Okay? Vertical development is about making the container bigger. It is about how you think. So the outcome of vertical stage development is the ability to think in more complex, systemic, strategic, and interdependent ways. It is about how you think as opposed to what you know. Is everyone following? Making sense? Okay. And so the vast majority of the people development efforts of our HR strategies that we deploy in organizations are what kind? Horizontal, right. And so that's my hypothesis for you to try on tonight, is that we need more vertical development to address this complexity issue, okay? So now what I want to do, next slide, before I put you back into your groups. Vertical development is not, it's also helpful to think about what it's not. It is not about personality. It's not about your competence, your behavior, your job position, your intelligence, or your socioeconomic status. You will find people at very high levels in organizations who do not have a high level of vertical development. And you will find people who you would never in a million years put in a leadership role in an organization, or you would never find them there, let me put it that way, who would never opt to work in an organizational setting for some reason, but are very vertically developed. So there's really no correlation to any of these other things, okay? So now what I want to ask you to do is go back into your discussion groups and try on this idea of vertical and horizontal development. So spend a couple minutes thinking and talking about when you have experienced horizontal development and when you have experienced vertical development. And what was the situation? Were you in a class maybe? Or did you take on a new role? Or often vertical development will happen when a significant life event changes, like having a baby or getting married or losing a loved one will sort of put us into this space where we're looking at the world from a different place. So I want you to think about what horizontal development experiences have I had? And when have I experienced vertical development? When has my worldview really shifted? So have some discussion and see what you can come up with. I was hearing some great snippets of conversation about some life-changing experiences. So let's start with horizontal. Who wants to share maybe a recent example of some horizontal development that they experienced? We're getting this stuff all the time, every day.
Well, I can give a great example because with my military 29 years, right? You start off vertical, okay, because you need to prove that can you think that way? Are you a vessel that we can put our time into developing horizontally?
Interesting.
Right. So once you put on your bar, right, you become an officer, et cetera.
Okay.
From there, then you go learn your specialty in your school, right? And then you learn horizontally because you become an expert, a master in that. Then you get a little more rank and you broaden that and learn to train those under you in those skills. Well, then you get a little more rank. Now you're vertical again, right? So that there.
So say more about the vertical part of that. What happens when you get another rank in?
Well, in the beginning, it's just, can we make you quit? Can we make you, is this really what you want to do? Right? And for me, in officer candidate school, that's 120 people down to 42, right? And it's not that you're more special than others, you're just a little more hard-headed, right?
You have to look at the world in a particular way in order to get through that experience?
That's
or
right. That's right.
Okay.
But then when you get to be a field grade officer, right, or you get a little higher, now you're critical again, right? Because you're leading leaders of leaders of leaders.
Yeah.
Okay, and their actions will directly affect negatively upon your area of influence, right? So now it's critical thinking once again.
Got it.
Right? How do I fit our culture into their culture? What is going on in the broader scheme of things?
Yeah, a
Who's
bigger.
friends with whom?
Yeah.
It's right.
I like that description of, I forget the word you just used, but bigger picture, going broader. So often we can also talk about vertical development as sort of getting on the balcony and looking at your life or looking at your situation. And so that's a nice metaphor, especially as you grow in organizations as a leader. Your balcony's getting bigger, right? Or the dance floor is getting more complicated. And vertical development often is about, can you get up on the balcony and sort of have that perspective as opposed to being the player in the action. Thank you. That's I like the military example. I had never considered that before. Who else? And let's just open it up vertical. Anyone, vertical or horizontal, anything? I heard some good vertical stories of people telling. I know they're a little vulnerable sometimes, but if somebody would be willing to share one as an example.
Side of things.
Nice, yeah. And so say more about the significance of that humanitarian side. What was so meaningful about that it changed how you look at the world?
Well, we agreed that it helped put things in perspective more. We were able to reprioritize things and be less bothered by trivial things.
Yeah.
And focus more on those eternal things or things that really impacted people's lives.
Great, awesome, great example, thank you. Anything else? Everyone kind of getting it? Getting the difference here? Good. Yeah, oftentimes, one of the things that is interesting about this, so we know all about child development in this regard, right? We know that we would never let a 10-year-old behind the wheel of a car, but when they get to be 16 or 17, we're beginning to consider that, right? So we know that children progress through stages of development. And that's essentially what we're going to talk about here, except we're going to talk about what those stages look like for adults. But here's a key difference between adult development and child development in this regard, is that children, it's automatic. For the most part, it just happens. They go through these stages. Their ability to handle complexity grows as they grow. But for adults, it is optional. Adults you can get to a certain stage of adult development and stay there for your whole life. And usually, vertical development will happen when somebody wants to grow, like they become very interested in personal development, or they have some kind of significant event that sort of forces people out into the void a little bit, where you realize that the way you've been making meaning is not sufficient, and so you begin to peel the onion and recreate that for yourself. But it's optional for adults, and that's what makes it so interesting. Yes?
When I deal with folks who lost their jobs and one of the things we do is we talk to them about their options. You don't have to continue doing what you were doing. You can take the skills you have and do something different.
Right.
And for some people, they can't see that.
Yes.
This is what they're used to, and
Yes.
that's all they want. There are some others who think they can do other things, like they'll say, oh, I think I'm going to be a consultant or a business owner, and then I can set my own hours.
Yes.
And I don't want to discourage them if that's really their dream, but
I thought I could set my own hours too. Yeah, but so I love that example, and as I introduce the framework to you, I would love to hang on to that and really maybe bring that back up again and see, okay, well, the person who thinks that they have to do what they were always doing and that this is what's expected, like, where might they be? And for the person who really can see other possibilities, where might they be? And that's a very relevant example, right? Okay, so a couple of things before I actually pop the framework up on there for you. It is evidence-based, so there are a number of researchers, most of whom are psychologists who have built out this framework. A couple of their names are up here: Jane Levenger, Robert Keegan. I think Jane Levenger is dead. Robert Keegan is at Harvard and has written a number of good books in this space. Suzanne Cook-Greuter is also alive and has done a lot of really interesting work in this space. So I just want you to know this is, well-researched and established, right? Even though for a lot of us it's new, and it was new to me a few years ago. I was like, why have I never heard of this before? It has been living in the world of psychology for a long time, and it's a newer field of psychology. And it's only really just now beginning to come into the business sphere, into the leadership development sphere, and looking at the applicability there. It is unidirectional, so I'm going to show you the next slide. I'll just show it. There's a brief look. We're going to come back to this. But there's 3 tiers and 8 stages. I know I said 7 stages on the first slide. I've combined a couple of things and whatever. So unidirectional, meaning that you go, adults, as children do, go through the stages sequentially. So often get asked, well, can you jump from one stage to like 3 stages ahead? No. It sort of goes in order, if you will. It's unidirectional. And then there's a center of gravity. So we say that people are making meaning from generally one stage of adult development most of the time, and that is their center of gravity, where most of the time they're looking through that lens. However, you don't as you develop as a human being, you don't lose what came before as you grow your capacity to see differently. So often we'll see people who largely are in one space, but they may also have some of what came before, and they may have a little bit of what's ahead. But we generally would say somebody's center of gravity is whatever stage it is that I'm going to show you, okay? And then language is really important. So we are not forming judgments about people's worth, okay? That is can be a common interpretation of this model, that later stages are preferred or are somehow better, and that's not the argument that I'm going to make to you tonight, and everyone would make the argument, would tell you that that's not how you should be thinking about this. So we don't use the language higher stages and lower stages because we're not trying not to put that judgment in there. We really say earlier stages and later stages. Now I am going to propose to you that there is a certain level of development that is required if you're going to be an innovative and transformational leader and be able to get results and meet the level of complexity that we're seeing in the world. Okay, I am going to say that. But the twist is that it doesn't mean that everybody has to be there. It just means that the leader ideally would be there, right? And so really what we're looking at is the fit between what somebody is doing, the kind of work they're doing or the kind of life they're leading, and their stage. We really would not want to see that complexity gap, that complexity crisis where there's a huge gap between what the person is being asked to deal with and what their capacity is. Does that make sense? Okay. So here is one model. There are multiple models out there. So if this rings your bell and you go out and start to read about this, you are going to find other language with fewer stages, different stages. Just know that. I chose one to show you tonight that's from the Center for Leadership Maturity. This is Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model that I had her name on the previous slide. And so we are going to step through all of these stages here in the middle. But for now, I just want to explain this pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional terms to you. So pre-conventional really are all the stages that children would go through. Okay, pre-conventional. We only have one up here that a very small number of adults is in, this self-centric, and we'd say less than 5% of leaders is in this stage, which is good, because the pre-conventional tier is really all about me. It's about my self-interest, and it's about getting what I want, sort of at all costs, if you will. Is anyone thinking about their children? I know I am. My 7-year-old, we just implemented a new reward system for him last week, that if he gets all of his little check marks during the day at school, he can have 20 minutes of video game time a night. What do you think my 10-year-old said when he heard about that? That's not fair! Right? He's totally thinking about himself, okay? That's generally what pre-conventional meaning making is. Okay, conventional meaning making, we're now talking about 75 to 80% of the adult population of leaders and organizations. This is really about identifying cultural norms, societal norms, organizational norms, and fitting into that. So to your point, Robin, what am I, if I've just been displaced, what am I expected to do? What does society tell me? Oh, I need to go be a whatever again, right? I need to work hard, I need to whatever. All of those messages that we get from outside of ourselves about what we are expected to do, that is generally what these conventional stages are, okay? And then what happens when we get to post-conventional is that people reach a point where they say, but I don't think I should have to work from 8 to 5, or I really don't want to, or whatever. People begin to deconstruct, question, challenge those messages that they're getting from society and from other people in their lives. Okay? This is a smaller number of people, 15 to 20%. And what happens as the post-conventional stages progress is that people kind of reinvent themselves in some way. And it can look kind of funny to the rest of us because often it's really countercultural. It's really kind of woo-woo and out there. Okay? We're going to look at an example. We're going to look at a few examples of where people are. Okay? Everyone with me? All right. So we're just going to hit on self-centric really quickly, just mostly because I adore Calvin and Hobbes, and I think this is hysterical. So Calvin says, I don't believe in ethics anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the ends justify the means. Get what you can while the getting's good. That's what I say. Might makes right. The winners write the history books. It's a dog-eat-dog world, so I'll do whatever I have to and let others argue about whether it's right. Hobbes shoves him. Hey, why'd you do that? You were in my way, now you're not. The ends justify the means. I didn't mean for everyone, you dolt, just me. This is a great example of what self-centric is about, okay? It's about winning any way possible, very self-oriented, might makes right, and can be manipulative, right? Okay, very childlike. So not very many of these people running around as adults or inside our organizations. Why?
They're running for president.
Yeah. I so wanted to use some political examples, but I also wanted you guys to like me at the end of the night. So, but yes, the political stage is a really great place to put some of this, to kind of play with it and test it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time here because it's not super relevant. I just think the comic is funny. Okay. So group-centric. This is about 10% of the adult population. You are going to see some of these people in your organization. This is a lot about affiliation. So belonging to a group, loyalty is really important to these folks. Power comes from affiliation. This is a lot about, it's not, maintaining the status quo, maintaining my position, maintaining my status, okay? And saving face is really important, right? Don't want to make anyone look bad. I don't want people to make me look bad. And there's an us versus them mentality, okay? So again, not a lot of people walking around like this, but some. Can anyone think of anybody they know or that they work with who might be making meaning from this place some of the time? Anyone in basic training? So military? Yeah, that's an interesting idea. What do you think?
I abstain.
You abstain, okay. Yeah, but certainly they're playing on, the military might be playing on affiliation and drawing out some of that thinking in order to get that sort of we break you down before we build you up, maybe? Yeah, it's plausible. Okay? All right, skill-centric. This is about 30 to 40% of the adult population. A lot of us are sitting in this skill-centric space, okay? We want to stand out and be unique. So what happens is we go to school, we go to trade school, we go to college, whatever it is, and we pick a profession, right? The vast majority of people go to work or choose to become mothers, and then it's about motherhood, whatever those various things are. We develop a specialty, develop an area of expertise. And we begin to define ourselves from that place, okay? I want to stand out and be unique. Can be a sort of a craft logic, specialist, a technician. Interestingly, can also be a lot about being right, which sometimes can be an advantage and maybe sometimes can be a disadvantage, right? So I have the answers, I know better than you do. That can be a part of this stage. Challenging for them to prioritize. There can be some micromanagement. Yes, but, right? Not super collaborative sometimes, like a little more competitive. And then the sense of humor can be a little bit more sarcastic or hostile. Is this ringing a bell for anybody in terms of people you work with? What's great about skill-centric? There are a lot of us here. What's great about this?
They take charge.
They know their stuff. They take charge. Yes, there is a ton of value in looking at the world through these eyes. And what are the opportunities? What's the downside of making meaning from this space?
Kind of myopic perspective.
Yeah.
Technology changes the games, and their skills are no longer relevant.
Yeah, good. Okay, I want to show you an example here. Let's see. So I'm going to tee this up for you. So I'm going to show you a video from American Idol with Harry Connick Jr. in it. And what has happened, we kind of come into the clip at an awkward time. Some contestants, this is like the tryouts or whatever, right, where they come in and they sing one-on-one. And someone has just finished singing, and Harry Connick Jr. is saying that he doesn't like the person, okay? So.
I'm not as taken by the smoke and mirrors and pentatonics as these two are. I'm just not. I'm not.
No, it's tone, there's tone, and it's not just the gymnastics.
It just didn't do it for me.
What thing are you talking about?
Pentatonics?
Pentatonics.
Yeah. It's basically we have 12 notes.
You know, all these things that Americans like.
No, but you know what's wrong with challenging America?
I like that.
Okay, so
Challenge me.
there
Tell me what the hell it
are
is.
12 notes.
Yes.
You know you got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si.
Yes.
There's also do, di, re, mi, mi,
Yes,
fa, mi.
yes, yes.
There's 12. Pentatonics are the classic go-tos for R&B singers, gospel singers, jazz musicians.
Right.
Those are the 5 notes that you hear everybody do the runs on. Those
Right.
5 notes, and any different.
You know too damn much.
Some people.
Okay. What do you notice?
Yeah, really technical.
Knows his stuff. Really technical. What did he think about J-Lo and what's his face over there? Yeah, and you notice that he doesn't like the woman who just sang because he thinks she's doing what everybody else is doing, right? Okay, this is a good example of skill-centric, right? Can be really valuable, right? He's probably going to be able to identify singers who are really good, but how is he kind of coming off to other people?
He's annoying them, so they don't want to work with him.
Yeah, can be a little annoying, right? J-Lo's like,
Forget you.
Okay, so that's skill-centric. Let's keep going. So what happens is people get to this skill-centric place. We develop an area of expertise, and we love applying our knowledge. We love being right. We love kind of being the big man on campus who knows the answer to stuff. And then if we're developing, right, again, it's optional, we might look around and go, gosh, I'm not really getting the results that I want. I kind of piss people off. When I was at this stage in my career, I was one of the only people at Lowe's who had been trained in change management, and I really did know a lot more than other people did, except my relationship management skills were in the toilet. And it really was making a lot of people pretty angry with me because I just was like, well, this is the way it is because this is change management. So I have some really fun stories about my own career from when I was in the skill-centric phase. So self-determining, you realize that maybe there's a different way to show up if you want to get things done, if you want the outcomes to be what you want the outcomes to be, as opposed to just being right. There's this realization that maybe I don't have all the answers and I need to work with other people. So become very focused on successful plans and outcomes, believing in the scientific method that answers can be found, really driven. These folks are working really hard. Okay, I'm wondering, our board of elections person who was going to go back to the office and stuff envelopes, right? There is a huge work ethic going on there. Open to learning and feedback that is going to help address goals, okay? And we begin to see some prioritization here, okay? Got another clip to show you. This one doesn't need much of an introduction.
Winning is great. Winning is so
Jack Welch,
good.
everybody? Okay.
When companies win, people win. When companies win, people win and they give back. They give back to their communities. You don't see people in losing companies, mentoring students, working in the town, helping out others. They can't. They're scared to death of losing their job. But when you win, people pay taxes, people give back. Everyone wins. And this whole thing is all about winning and getting that philosophy into an organization.
Stop. Okay. Nope. Okay. What do you notice?
Authoritative, is that what you're meaning, like how he came across?
Yeah, yeah. What do you notice that tees up with the self-determining that we just looked at? Self-determining.
He's focused on the outcomes, and he gave a laundry list of outcomes when you win.
Yeah.
And what, that's the reason you go there.
What is winning?
And,
Oh, go ahead.
and Jessica, one of the things I felt as he was talking was collaboration. We're in a win-win.
Uh-huh.
We.
Okay.
We do it together. We can collaborate
Yeah.
together and make this
Right. Which is how I ran G,
Yeah,
which we know how capital ended up.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it fits.
So what's interesting about this, and going back to when I was talking about conventional meaning making being really about understanding what those external messages are around norms, he doesn't even define what winning is, right? Do we know what kind of winning he's talking about, though? Business winning, right? Right? And because we're accultured, right? we know where we're living in the world we're living in. We know what he means. But he's so into his self-determining that he doesn't even define. He doesn't really talk about what winning is. Okay? And do you feel the energy, the work ethic that kind of comes out in how he's talking? Yeah, the passion. Okay? So what's great about self-determining? Again, this is another 30 to 40% of us. A lot of us are sitting in this space. What's great about this?
It's inspiring and collective.
Get stuff done, right? What's maybe not so great about it? What's the downside? Yeah.
It can come off a little like he's almost preaching to you, like this, like a little harsh in a way, almost. Even though I can think it comes from a good place, like passionate can also be harsh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's his definition of winning.
His definition of winning, yeah. So there's still a little bit of expert, skill-centric in there, right? Of like, I know the answer.
There's no self-assessment.
Yeah. So what was still happening at most of us who are sitting in this conventional space, we're like swimming in the sea. We're not able to get on the balcony, okay? That is going to come next, okay? You're not getting on the balcony a whole lot here, okay? So one of the major downsides to living in this self-determining space is exhaustion or getting tired. Run, work. I can always get more done. It's about getting outcomes. I just keep going. And then I get tired, right? I get burned out. And so we wake up one day and start to question things, okay? And so this is the first stage that's in that okay, we're going to move on, post-conventional here. So this is when people begin to take apart those societal norms and expectations, okay? And really start to say, who am I really? What do I really value? What do I really want my life to look like? And how can I begin to align my life with who I really am, despite what everybody else is telling me? Despite what everybody else is telling me, okay? So increased value on complexity, beginning to be able to think in systems, able to make things object, so that idea of getting on the balcony, instead of being subject to it, I'm able to hold it out in front of me and look at it as though it's an object. Testing beliefs and assumptions, so on, okay? And the other headline here that I would offer you is a desire to begin to be more than do. Being and doing becomes a distinction at this space, okay? So for the sake of time, self-actualizing is the next stage that comes after this. This is the stage at which the researchers are making the argument, if you are in a major leadership role, leading transformation and innovation in your organization, this is the level at which you can begin to appropriately address the complexity. And so it's interesting that about 80% of us are sitting in skill-centric and self-determining, and yet this is where the juice is for leaders, okay? Which is where the business imperative comes along for how do we develop people, okay? And then the last couple of stages that I combined, just to give you an example, is construct aware and unitive. These are people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, right? These people who are visionaries are able to really challenge some of the fundamental beliefs that we hold in society and do it in a way that almost feels magical or light or surprising, okay? So I want to show you one example of post-conventional just so, and I want you to really listen to the language and especially think about how it's different from Jack Welch. We got Oprah here.
As a human being. I just want to end with this. There are no mistakes. There really aren't any. Because you have a supreme destiny. When you're in your little mind, in your little personality mind, where you're not centered, where you really don't know who you are, that you come from something greater and bigger, and we really all are the same. When you don't know that, you get all flustered. You get stressed all the time, wanting something to be what it isn't. There is a supreme moment of destiny calling on your life. Your job is to feel that, to hear that, to know that. And sometimes when you're not listening, you get taken off track. You get in the wrong marriage, the wrong relationship, you take the wrong job. Yeah, but it's all leading to the same path. There are no wrong paths. There are none. There's no such thing as failure, really, because failure is just that thing trying to move you in another direction. So you get as much from your losses as you do from your victories.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. How different is she from Jack Welch?
Inside out.
More introspective, yeah. And she's saying there are no failures. What's Jack Welch talking about? Right? Right. Okay. So it's just very, very different, right? And so as you begin to tune, what I'd love for you guys to do coming out of tonight is to just tune into how people are talking and just listen to the lens that they seem to be speaking through or thinking through, okay? And just begin to formulate some hypotheses about that. So on your table, we're running out of time, so let's move on. Here's the point that I made a couple minutes ago, is that research does show that corporate and individual performance does vary according to stage of development, okay? Self-centric, group-centric, skill-centric leaders are significantly less effective than self-determining leaders, okay? And self-determining leaders do better, but it is really post-conventional leaders who are able to consistently innovate and transform their organizations. Okay, that comes from Rook and Torbert. That's a Harvard Business Review article, okay? So there is a significant business implication here that I think has a significant impact on us as HR professionals in terms of how do we develop people, okay? So you've got a case study on your table. Does everyone have that? It's another Sparks Group page, but it's text. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. We're going to move pretty fast here. Give you a couple of minutes to read that. And what I want you to do is just, and on the back of your note-taking sheet, you have a box with the stages on it, a table. So use the table to try and form a hypothesis about what stage of development the two main characters in our case study are at. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. There are two people who get talked about in the case study, Fred and An. I want you to read the case study and try and develop a hypothesis about what stage they're at. What do you think? What about An, our CFO? What stage do you hypothesize she might be at? Okay, yep. So which vertical stage of development, if we were to make a guess about where she is, where would you put her? Skill-centric. Why?
She wants to learn, she's going home at night, she's studying, she's meeting with the labor lawyer.
Yeah.
She wants to do it all.
Yeah, yeah. What is success from her perspective?
She wants to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, knowing the answer, right? Knowing the answer. Good. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, what about Fred? You think self-determining? Why? What clues do you have?
Well, because he's already formulated a plan, even though he hasn't launched it, and it's in the development stage, but he's ready to. where he's trying to get ahead of the competition by 5 years.
Yeah.
And he's not wanting to abandon it, he's just wanting to work with the new.
Yeah. Good. Good. So I would agree with both of those. Now, we can't really know what stage somebody is at. We can make a hypothesis and hold it lightly and just be open, but it can be helpful to understand and appreciate where somebody is making meaning from. So what's going to be, let me ask the same question I asked about On. What is most important to Fred, or how's Fred defining success?
What he's able to accomplish with the company.
Yeah, yeah, good. Everyone good with that? I know I'm pushing you along at a pretty fast clip here. We just got a couple more slides and then we are going to wrap up. I want to make sure that I answer the question, so what? I'm missing football. What do I do when I get to the office tomorrow? Okay? So I have a few things I want to offer you as food for thought about how you might apply or play with this concept of vertical development. So I would encourage you, and I think we got started on this thinking tonight, think about the complexity that your organization is facing and think about the complexity that the leaders in your organization are dealing with. Think about what you're dealing with as an HR leader. And what kinds of development, what kinds of support is the organization offering to help people in the organization deal with that complexity? Can you form your own little analysis, even if it's subjective, about how those two pieces of the puzzle are matching up to each other? Okay, is there a gap in your organization between the level of complexity and the capacity of the leader? You can consider introducing vertical development into your organization. There are a couple of assessments that actually do tell you what stage of vertical development somebody is at. Coaching is a really terrific way to help grow somebody vertically, and it can be embedded in your leadership development programs. And I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on these bottom two bullets here. So coaching, I just think this picture is hysterical. I had to put it in. Like, the drama. So you can develop a stage hypothesis on somebody. Again, holding it lightly because we don't really know unless we assess them. But if you can understand what is important to somebody and how they're going to be interpreting various situations, it may offer you some clues as to how you would interact with them or how you would support them or how you might influence them, okay? And you can think about coaching them from a stage perspective. So people are either at the stage they're at and adding competency, sort of what we call consolidating in a stage. They can also be in transition from one stage to another stage, meaning they're trying on new ways of thinking or they're questioning how they've been doing it up to that point. And then occasionally people will regress. Usually something significant and traumatic has happened that will cause someone to regress to an earlier stage of meaning making, like a significant death or a fire or something like that will cause someone to go backwards. You won't see that very often though. So you can keep that in mind as you're wearing your coaching hat at work. And then finding the edge of their meaning making. How can you sort of push people to grow their capacity, to grow their ability to look at things in new ways, is to ask them to look at their beliefs. What do you believe about whether or not HR should be centralized or decentralized? And then, how might you be wrong? So asking people to challenge their own beliefs and articulate their own assumptions can be very, very powerful in terms of helping people make better decisions and expand their thinking. Asking questions 3 times. This sounds sort of silly, but the first couple times that you ask someone a question, they'll usually answer it the same way. But by the time you ask it the 3rd time, they actually will stop and give you a more thoughtful, deeper answer. So if you're really trying to help somebody see something in a new way, repetition, right? Just keep coming back around to it. And then lastly, subject-object moves. So this is the idea that if I'm subject to something, I can't see it. So I am subject to my craving for chocolate. I identify with it. I will go home and have some ice cream tonight. Like I just am subject to it. I do not hold my craving for chocolate as object, right? It has me, I don't have it. That's a really simple, silly example. But the more that we can make things object versus being subject to them, the more that we have choice about how we respond or what we do versus just responding or reacting, okay? So several different things you can try when you're wearing your coaching hat with your folks. And then from a leadership development perspective, the Center for Creative Leadership has some really wonderful content about how to build leadership development experiences that encourage vertical development. And at a high level, what they recommend is that these experiences include 3 components. Heat experiences. This is when a leader is basically pushed out of their comfort zone and they're forced to acknowledge and examine the limits of their current meaning making. And they realize that it's inadequate. Second is colliding perspectives. So then when someone realizes that it's insufficient, they become more open to what other people have to say and other perspectives that may be out there in order to fill the gap, right? To fill in the holes of where their own meaning making is falling short. And lastly is elevated sense making. So then how does the leader integrate that? Usually in coaching or some other kind of process where they're able to kind of put it all back together again. I was pushed out of my comfort zone. I had to go get help or find an answer for that gap, and then I'm going to reintegrate that, and maybe my perspective or my worldview begins to shift, okay? They have a couple of white papers out there. If you're in the space of doing any training at all, they have a couple of really excellent excuse me, really excellent white papers that list a number of pretty detailed suggestions that are terrific. And we're going to go ahead and skip this, but I'll just leave it as a takeaway for you. What was most relevant for you tonight, and how might vertical development be of help for you in your organization? So with that, we'll release. We're just a couple minutes past 7:30. I really appreciate all of you guys staying, and I hope that your world has been opened just a little bit more like mine was when I learned about this. So thanks so much.